Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Industrial Real Estate Show. I'm pleased to be joined by someone that I've actually gotten to know reasonably well over the last year or so here, Jonathan Hirst, who's an expert in everything racking. And we're going to talk about pallet racking and all the things you need to be aware of in a warehouse. And I've had the pleasure of touring Jonathan's facility a couple of times now. We're working on a video showing how these systems are actually manufactured. But today we're going to be talking more about why racking and what we need to be aware of and some important considerations. So, with that introduction, Jonathan, thanks so much for joining me on this call.
Thanks so much, Chad. It's a real pleasure. It was great having you at the manufacturing facility here in Nisku, Alberta, and your questions and your audience are amazing. So really looking forward to this afternoon.
Yeah, and it's funny. I put on Twitter about having an expert in racking coming on, and a lot of questions came up. And I think racking is almost something that people have as an afterthought. So maybe they buy a building or they're leasing a building and there's already existing racking in there, or they are thinking about leasing a space and they just assume that racking can be done after the fact. And
Yeah,
I think we can dispel a lot of those notions, or at least help people make better decisions by talking about what racking is,
yeah,
what things need to be accounted for and considered in advance of making a decision, and not leaving it as an afterthought, but actually appreciating how important it is. And you and I have talked about this before. Racking has historically almost been the Wild West, where someone
yeah.
could go and do that. They could just be like, okay, well, I'm going to throw up a bunch of racking over here and maybe I'll bolt it to the floor and maybe I won't. But there wasn't any regulation, or there wasn't any mandatory requirements. So, what can you give me a history of racking? Is that accurate? Is that a
Sure,
reasonable
sure.
portrayal of it?
I love bringing people into the light. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned there about people, but racking being an afterthought. I mean, that's a very reasonable and honest place to start because that's the way it's been. Pallet racking in particular within a warehouse, traditionally has been considered, not only by owner operators but even under code, and certainly by tax law as furniture, warehouse
Hmm.
furniture, non-structural, non-structurally critical, usually not permitted. In the Canadian landscape, over the last 20 years, I'll say, there has been what is really only a guideline, and guideline available through CSA. It wasn't recognized by any building code provincially or nationally. It was just simply it was a document available through CSA that was, at best a design guide on how do we assess capacities, how do we do layouts, that type of thing. Only since the National Building Code of Canada 2020 has there been any reference to this design guide to actually now being mandatory, and it's thrown a other few good things as well. Things like the requirement to have sealed drawings and the requirement to show racking on those sealed drawings in a plan layout. Back in the day, we just have, racking floating on white space on paper. Well, now when you draw it and you seal that drawing, it has to be shown within the footprint of the building because we are now understanding that racking is in fact structurally integral to the safe operation of that facility. So that means we absolutely were checking the racking, but we're also checking the floor. Can the floor take point loads of 20, 13, 15, 18,000 pounds? Can it accept the uplift when we talk about seismic areas where you get, 5,000, 9,000 pounds of tension of that base plate ripping itself out of the ground? So we're checking that. Is that a limitation? We work alongside fire and sprinkler experts to make sure our storage heights and the actual classifications of what we're storing are suitable for the heights we want to put them at. And of course, I mean, as an engineer, public safety is paramount. So, even when I'm laying this stuff out and I'm checking the slab to make sure it's okay, and we're making sure the sprinkler's in place, I'm looking at things like egress paths. Can an associate working in this facility get out in the time or distance that is specified within the building code. These are all types of things that go together when we're doing a building permit application now. And again, in some provinces, uh, the thought of a building permit for pallet racking is as new as the implementation of the 2020 building code. We've been putting racking in buildings across Canada for 40 plus years. And it's only now that a lot of these building officials and safety code reviewers are having to look at pallet racking. And a lot of them are coming to companies like ours to say, what am I asking for here? And is this sufficient? So it's when I say the Wild West, it's a learning curve for owner operators. It's a learning curve for the safety officials. And I mean, it goes without saying, but nobody goes to engineering school to be a rack engineer. So there's a lot of industrial training as well, educational opportunities for engineers with structural design experience, but maybe not, applied to racking. So they may understand the concept of column strength and connection strength, but um, how does that relate to a beam bracket and how it sits on a pallet rack column? So that may be new to a lot of people. And as this code is rolling out across Canada, yeah, there's some areas that are ahead of the curve. There's some areas that this is new to them, and they're asking a lot of great questions, and so there's learning that needs to happen, and it's great. I'm feeling less and less like the old man on top of the mountain yelling at clouds. I mean, people are actually getting on board with this, and our best clients, to your point, call us and say, you know what, I'm considering a number of location lease options or opportunities. Can we just run some scenarios with the product that I'm storing, the equipment that I'm using, the storage heights that I'm looking for, make sure that slab's going to be okay, make sure that our egress is going to be okay. And we do that. That's part of our service. I mean, we're in the business of building rack. That's where ultimately we want to get to. But our best relationships are with clients that are just forward thinking. They're two steps ahead. Like when if they pull a trigger on a place, they've probably already got a rack layout in mind. They already know what equipment they're putting in there. And again, if you work with us, we in a lot of cases we just run all the permit engineering as a preliminary, just some high level stuff. So we know that when this client hits go and now they're on lease, it's a straight shot to a permit. Like, let's get this thing going. Let's get these people up and running. So yeah, real exciting times. There you
I
go.
want to jump into all those things that need to be
Yeah.
considered, like point loads and ceiling heights and grid column spacing. But first, there'll be some people that are tuned in from the US here, and I know you do most of the stuff in Canada. But I think everybody would appreciate that a building in Canada, a building in the US, or building anywhere in the world for that matter is going to be pretty similar. The laws, I'm sure, are what's going to differ. Have you had much experience in what the US is experiencing on a similar type of trajectory on whether they're moving from a wild west to more of a controlled environment as well?
The US runs by a different code. I sit. Our company is a member of RMI, which is a subset group, which stands for Racking Manufacturers Institute. We have what's considered from that group an RMARC, which is a certification that we can do engineering in the U.S., project management in the U.S., installation oversight in the U.S. I don't do a lot of direct work in the U.S., but I work through resellers and vendors and integrators, and we supply projects from Texas to California, Arizona, all the way up to Portland, Oregon, uh, Salt Lake City. I mean, we have quite a few clients in the U.S. because I mean, when um, when the exchange is right, it more than makes up for some freight. And so we have all the work, we have the knowledge and all the working templates for building to U.S. code. U.S. is tougher, especially on the seismic side, as far as permit evaluation. In the U.S., there's a whole sub business of engineering for seismic because the code and safety code officers that we find, we've done projects in California, Portland, Washington State. I'll get calls from those reviewers and they'll want to talk about the calculations and they'll want to kind of just step through, okay, yep, I agree. And if they have concerns, we have um, informed discussions to work through to get in that permit application. So I would say from a permitting aspect, they're well ahead of the curve. From the actual code compliance, the US have just updated their codes for pallet racking, cantilever, wire mesh deck through MHI, and they're getting more aligned with the Canadian code. Canadian code kind of took the bar and pushed it way out there around 2016, 2018 timeframe. The US ASC 7 and those groups now are now kind of aligning with some of those same factors, which is really what we're looking for. We don't want a scenario where, I mean, we'll just pick a, I don't want something a pallet rack going in to Detroit to require massively different engineering or create different engineering outputs than racking going into Windsor. Or I don't want racking that's going into Vancouver to be massively different than Sumas, Washington, or something like that. Like they're literally across a dotted line on a piece of paper. So the math ideally drives towards the same result, and we're getting there. So yeah, brand new code in Canada, across Canada, and I sit on a review board for the U.S. codes as well, and we're just signing off some final commentary on the latest U.S. engineering. So yeah, great time to be in rack engineering.
Yeah, well, it's a great time to be aware of this too, because with the Wild West being gone, that means you can't act in the Wild West. So you can't just go into a manufacturing building now and say, well, I'm going to put up 3 levels of racking and just ignore it. You now, presumably, correct me if I'm wrong, you actually need to get a permit now to actually install racking.
Permitting is very municipality specific. Some municipalities need a full permit, some don't. Some will inspect, will have their own inspectors. Some will allow the responsible engineer to do the final inspection. That varies, and I encourage every owner operator to talk to their municipality as part of this planning process. What do you need? The permit itself, that package is pretty universal as far as the key components: structural drawing of the rack, verification of the slab, verification of sprinklers, verification of life safety. That's almost universal. What's variable is whether the municipality requires it. Sometimes they require it if it's indoors, but not outdoor rack. Sometimes both. So that type of thing. But certainly, what we're getting away from is people moving into an existing facility, inheriting rack, and just using it. In a lot of cases, a lot of municipalities, you actually need to get that racking re-permitted for your application in order to get your business license. So, I mean, for considering there are large parts of this country that had no requirements, there's a little bit of shell shock. And again, it's racking is on the surface pretty simple, right? Hook, hole, hook it together. Anybody can do it. It's easy to put together. It's hard to put together properly. Plumb it to the correct tolerances, anchoring it properly, that type of thing. And mixing OEM manufacturers parts just because it fits together doesn't mean it goes together. So there's a lot of that in the past it was like, nah, it's standing. It's been standing for 10 years. Let's keep going. No longer. Now you've got to, as an owner operator, it is incumbent upon you to do your due diligence, and your occupational health and safety groups, as applicable for your state or your province, will hold you accountable to checking that stuff before you use it.
Well, and even beyond just the paperwork or technical aspect of it, there's that public and employee safety element to it. And a guilty pleasure of mine is watching forklift fail videos where forklifts will tap a piece of racking and then the whole warehouse collapses. I don't know why I find it so amusing, but it's just so crazy how the lightest nudge on a piece of racking, presumably which wasn't installed correctly, will just take the whole thing down. That's a major risk. So if somebody buying a building or a tenant going into a building that has a racking system, even if the municipality isn't requiring it to be certified or inspected, there is that public risk thing where it might have been improperly installed and poses a risk. Is that
100%.
something that you've come across?
Yeah, it goes back to what I said before. People think because it fits together, it goes together, and a lot of these systems. I mean, a racking. If you look at a pallet racking system, especially one where you're really filling out a warehouse, um, that is generally designed where, if you take out a leg, there's no way that should come down. So when you see that, you're looking at significantly overstressed facilities, probably under-engineered, um, not necessarily didn't meet code. I mean, a lot of times people don't really understand the engineering behind the racking, and it looks good on paper and sign off on it, right? And as long as an owner operator, well, as long as somebody signed off on it, let's get going. So you really do have to be careful what you're using and where's the material coming from? I mean, is this a heavy gauge roll formed material or structural material? Or is this a very, very thin light gauge, zinc coated, who knows where it came from, kind of folded tin type of thing. I mean, racking has an enormous strength to weight ratio, and when designed properly, and I've been in them. I've been in those warehouses and stood right behind it where that middle leg, a leg in the front of a system is wiped out. It is not touching the floor, and that doesn't come falling down if the system is properly and properly designed, properly installed, um, to code. It's really these outliers. And yeah, knock on wood, Canada has been very lucky as far as rack collapse incidents. There certainly have been a few in the last 25 years, but as I say, they are getting fewer and farther between because the awareness is there. And at the end of the day, as a buyer or purchaser, owner operator, I mean, you do have to realize you got a duty of care. I mean, those people working in your warehouse, they don't get a voice to say, what, maybe go with a stronger one versus the cheaper one, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are working around it, right? And the other thing that's changed the landscape for rack safety in this country and in the U.S. Is the proliferation of racking coming out of these dark, dirty warehouses, back rooms, and now it's front of store on a retail basis. It's in your home improvement warehouse stores. It's in your bulk size retailers, right? That racking, that warehousing is no longer in the back where everybody presumably has had, you know, industrial safety, warehouse training, and situational awareness of an industrial environment. Well, that industrial environment is now where I'm dragging my kids on a Saturday morning and pushing my cart through this stuff. So that is not only up the level of engineering awareness, adherence to installation guidelines, but it's also done things like improve fit and finish quality, right? Retailers that are creating an environment do not want some scabby old piece of rack that's been dipped into a puddle of wet paint and left to drip air dry. They want smooth, clean, powder coated finishes and a variety of colors, smooth welds, and things like when you have beam locking clips. We used to do still have beam locking clips that just sit there. They just kind of gravity just holds them in place. Um, Having worked with retailers with pallet racking, we soon discovered that while mom or dad is looking at eyesight, trying to decide what drawer knob to pick, little fingers down at the 3 foot level are pulling safety pins out of beams, putting me in pockets. So, we have a range of safety clips that are retained that, that once they're in, they're in. They can't be pulled out easily, stuff like that. Retail really did change the landscape for pallet racking manufacturing in North America without a doubt.
I'm sure everyone's going to look at pallet racking a little bit differently next time they're in a Home Depot, because I know that I will. I'll be much more focused on that. Wyatt, I'm going to get you to pull up that image that I sent you about
Oh,
a graphic in a warehouse. And
mhm,
just as you're pulling that up, one thing that a big takeaway that I'd encourage everyone to just note on this is if you ever come across a warehouse that has existing racking in there, uh, take the due diligence to ensure that it is actually appropriate for the use that's going in there, and don't just assume that the next user or the a buyer or a tenant is going to be able to use it as it is, but actually spend a bit of time ensuring that it's proper. So thanks for sharing that, Jonathan. So
yeah.
I got this I saw this on a brochure for a large warehouse that's getting built in my market. It's about 500,000 feet. It's actually not far from you, Jonathan. And this was an interesting graphic that I saw, and I wanted to get your thoughts on a few things on here. So they showed it as the 40-foot clear in this particular case, and then they compared that to 32 and 36-foot clear. And well, one of the main benefits of a warehouse and having vertical space is that you get to take advantage of the cubic footage as opposed to just the square footage. So presumably that 40-foot high means you can put an extra layer of racking on there. But
Mhm.
there's a number of things that came up from questions that people had on this. So I think everyone can get behind the notion that higher ceiling heights means you can put another layer of racking on there. But one thing that came up was, can you even access those higher levels with forklift technology that's available? And if you can, does that mean that you need to have a larger forklift and thus you need to have the racks further apart? So does that affect the column grid? So when you see this, what's your first thoughts actually when you see a graphic like this? What is that telling you?
So there's two different pieces of equipment that immediately jump to mind. I mean, first off, you're looking at a reach truck of some type. Though it would you would not use in any kind of warehouse if you're putting the investment in to use the height, you're not going to just immediately give it away by buying a giant counterbalance and require 14-foot aisles to get to this level. If you can avoid it, if you're dealing pallets. I've actually dealt with clients that deal with high levels of like cantilever. They be using a slightly different type of product handling. But for something like this, you're looking at a reach truck, probably considering a wire guided uh, turret truck. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what a turret truck is, for something like this, imagine almost it looks like a snail. It's very heavy duty. It runs in a very narrow aisle. That aisle, it changes. There's a few factors involved, but let's just say you're talking 6 feet and under. So where
Mm.
typical pallet reach truck, you're looking at a 10-foot aisle. When you go very, very high, you require specialized equipment with big counterbalances. But the footprint, because it's so ungainly, you're not turning corners. That big, heavy unit is stuck on the floor and it doesn't turn. It goes forward, it goes backward. And then at the end of the aisle, you leave about 16 feet or so to move to the next aisle. And in that aisle, they'll have usually an embedded wire in the floor. And that truck is picking up that wire and it's called wire guided. And it just automatically stays centered down that aisle on that wire, which allows us to encroach on what would typically be, you know, a buffer space for movement. So if when you get wire guided, those things, the operator is going up and down aisles, up or backwards, right? Down aisles. They'll go up in a lot of cases with the forks to to whatever beam level that is. And of course, the machine doesn't turn, right? So this is where it comes into like what we call a turret truck. And the actual forks themselves on the turret has a mechanism where the turret or the mast, sorry, the mast doesn't necessarily rotate. There'll be an end of arm actuator which turns the forks and the pallet. and then there'll be an extension aspect of it, usually like a pentagram type of extension, and it will insert it into the bay and come back, rotate straight, and down it goes. So yeah, for these big heights, there's definitely equipment available. You're talking six figures and higher. You're probably talking quite a significant lead time for something like that. And then those types of applications require a very systematic view. So you're not just going to, buy one of these wire guided, man aboard turret trucks, and that's it. Because that's obviously not going to load on your trucks, right? So we create these transition areas where we have these very uh, high level accessibility trucks. We create this interface racking where, like a dock loader or something that's small, maybe a sit down counterbalance three wheeler, small reach truck, whatever, can can pick. So you got this big monster doing your high level picks. They'll go to the end of the aisle and they'll put it on a transition rack, which your little truck loader can reach, right? So when you're doing stuff that's high level, you've got to really look at all aspects of that handling. How are you loading? How are you unloading? I mean, um, if you go to a very narrow aisle, you really do eliminate the ability to effectively use other forms of motorized equipment, pallet jacks and things like that, because you do encroach on the space. I mean, if these trucks go down these narrow aisles, they fill the aisle. You don't walk around it, right? So, completely different approach to workflow, material flow. But as far as these heights, this is where we're at. This is our industry, 32 to 40 foot and higher. We're seeing this all the time, especially in some of the Midwest, non-seismic east areas. You're not getting that. There's other options for tall picking when you're into seismic areas. But yeah, no, if this came across our desk, no problem at all. We got lots of ideas.
Is that 66-inch pitch beam pitch? Is that a good rule of thumb for, let's just say you're looking at an existing facility and this
Mhm.
this would have been designed and engineered, I'm sure, to accommodate this type of racking. But let's say you're looking at an existing facility and you're considering between one building at 24 feet clear and another building at 32-foot clear. Can you use that 66-inch beam pitch as a rule of thumb for how many levels of racking you could get into any individual building?
Yeah, that might be a little high. Again, I would only say to use that if you're just trying to do some rough math as to how many pallets you can get in a particular stack to do a pallet count evaluation. It really does come down to what is the size of the pallets you're storing. Um, there's other nuances that'll come into it. It's a very, very rough gauge, but I would say, if you have a typical 48-inch pallet, um, allow for 6 inches of lift off, right? So you're 54 inches. This is three wide, so that's going to be a bigger beam. So we're at 56. You need a 6-inch beam at least for that. So I mean, you're at 62. Most pallet racking is adjustable in the US on 2-inch centers. In Canada, it's on 3-inch centers. So in Canada, you'd be 60, 63, or 66. In the US, you'd be at 60, 62, 64, 66. So, anywhere between 60 and 66 inches is a reasonable number if you're shooting floor to ceiling in a particular area. What you need to know again is your pallet height, because when we're doing exercises like this, we do a quick count. All right, how many pallets are going to fit between here and the clear space? You have to assume that you're leaving at least 18 inches short of your clear space just for overhead sprinkler flue. It needs clear space to spread out when it comes out of those sprinkler heads. It has a fall distance and a spread distance. 18 inches is kind of a working number without getting into specifics. If you're going to this height, you're probably looking at an in-rack sprinkler. So one level is going to require additional beam pitch. So for something like this, I would just hazard a guess. that somewhere maybe at the midpoint on this, you're going to need a 72-inch beam pitch or something like that to allow for possibly for in-rack sprinklers. So it's a good rough guess, but really you need to consult with your rack designing partner. Look at look at the size of your pallets. We look at pallet turnover, um, that type of thing. We'll look at your picking and place operation, and we really do kind of get to a pallet count. But yeah,
Mhm.
66 is about minimum for a 48-inch tall pallet as far as workable height.
Well, thanks for elaborating on that. Why you can close this down. Can you explain the difference between ESFR sprinklers, which I think most people are going to be familiar with, and in-rack sprinkler systems?
Um, I'm not a sprinkler engineer, but I do work with a number of them, so I'm somewhat adjacent. So in let's just look at the three categories, and I'll knock one off really quick. If you have an existing facility without sprinklers, you need to talk about what classification you've got, because you will be limited to the storage height in that facility, regardless of how tall the ceiling is. If there's no sprinklers, there is a limit to how far you can stack your pallets. So let's just put that aside. Now you're talking about overhead sprinklers. An ESFR system that's up in the roof, especially for tall buildings, um, they're kicked off by heat, right? So they're kicked off by some sort of thermal event. Um, if you move into a facility that's 40 feet tall, you're starting up, you've got an existing facility of say, 26 foot tall, 24-foot tall rack from your old place. Let's just move that 24-foot rack over into the new building. And once we get up and running, start expanding and maybe take advantage of of our overhead opportunity space, in third quarter, year two, whatever. You're going to run into a problem with that from a fire standpoint because you're bringing over your racking. All your material is down below 24 feet. Um, the sensors for your overhead sprinklers are up in the girders at 40 feet. So that distance is too far, right? So you can have short racking, but if you have a thermal event down near the ground, I mean, you're going to lose property, you lose assets before that heat builds up sufficiently to kick off those overhead sprinklers. So, um, you know, in contrast, if you have racking that goes right to the ceiling, um, now any thermal events up in the upper half of that space would kick off the sprinklers. But unfortunately, they're shielding all the potentially combustible material that's down in the lower half of that vertical space. So both of these scenarios, or all three of these scenarios, bring into play the possibility of in-rack sprinklers. And what they are is essentially, it's hard piped down into the mechanical flue space or some other space allocated um, for that hard piping, and then it gets run out in branches. And I've seen in most cases within rack sprinklers, it's kind of a two-part approach. They drop they'll again, I'm not a sprinkler engineer, but they drop the main header pipes down, then they spread out at whatever level is the designer has determined into the flue space, and then you have fingers that come off of that pipe into each bay with a little ESFR sprinkler. Um, those then need to be positioned. We often have to allocate additional space in a bay, maybe on beam to beam pitch, to use the terms we just saw. Sometimes even we need a wider bay so the sprinkler can sit in the middle, and we have sufficient space to load and unload on either side of that sprinkler head bay. So, but what that would do is now you've got your essentially your heat sensitive discharge units at a lower level and an upper level, depending on the commodity. I've seen two levels within the sprinklers, within the racking. And if that's the scenario, then from a racking standpoint, we have to work very carefully with those sprinkler designers to make sure there's room for those pipes to move in the flue space. Because generally, when you lay out racking, I'm sure most people can imagine you start by building it on either side of the building column, and we make sure we maintain a certain distance off that building column because the building moves and the rack moves and they move at different rates. So we have to leave enough space. Well, if I jam a sprinkler header through there, I need more space, right? So we're part of an integrated solution when we're talking ESFR and in-rack sprinklers. If it's ESFR, great. If it's in-rack, that becomes actually part of your pallet racking design task. So does that answer your question?
It
Too
does.
long, too
Yeah.
much?
And no, no, it was making me think that to your earlier comment that nobody grows up wanting to be a racking engineer. I'm sure nobody grows up wanting to be a sprinkler engineer either. It's
Well, I'll tell you, you know what? A lot in the file box storage industry, which is a real kind of standalone type of specialized type of racking, and certainly a very interesting industry. You could go down the rabbit hole with cloud storage and having to maintain hard copies these days. We will build elaborately complex multi-level storage systems and literally fill out buildings like corner to corner, roof to floor, door to door, um, full of sprinklers, right? Full of file boxes full of papers. And there was a few years back now, I was sent some photographs. I think it was from New Jersey or New York, um, and it was portside file box storage facility that had suffered damage. I don't know if it was earthquake damage or whatever, but it, like many other of these facilities, when you have substantial, well-designed rack inside a building, you can actually see where the building itself has collapsed, and now the racking is holding the roof up or supporting portions of that building because it is enormously strong when it's done done properly, right? So it's you may like those rack collapse videos. I like the rack hero videos where in a disaster you can just through the smoke clearing you see this orthogonal structure hanging on for dear life. Love that. Love it.
yeah, well, I might need to transition and watch some more of those videos
Yeah.
instead.
Yeah,
uh,
one's yours is probably more exciting, I gotta admit.
Yeah. So with new buildings, I think it's pretty self-explanatory that a company's going to come in, they're going to hire someone like you to consult on the racking system. Where there's uncertainty is probably in the existing inventory. So a company moving into a building that's already up, or someone's investing in a building and they're trying to figure out what's possible from the building already being there as opposed to integrating it into the initial design. What are some of the things that you look for? So a company says to you they've got a couple properties that they're looking at. What do you need from them to determine what a layout plan could look like?
Okay. Um, so let's just start at the beginning. Let's assume that in your scenario, there's racking already standing in the facility. The very first thing I'm going to ask for is, do you have a sealed drawing for the racking that's there? Um, Certainly in this country, and I think there's a general there's a bit of a grandfathering aspect. If you have a sealed drawing on file, if you're an owner operator, always get a sealed drawing when you put racking in because that sealed drawing will actually transcend changes in code down the road. So if you build out your system to work for your facility and choose this column and these beams and these elevations, it's on paper and it's sealed. That transcends changes in building code, right? So that's very important to have. If you forego that, and as per our earlier conversation, many people are like engineering, some engineering, um, that rack could have been standing since 2008. If we're approached by a client and there is no previous documentation, it gets evaluated as per today's code. And, certainly in seismic areas, but I would say in general across the board, the code is getting more conservative. Um, the stakes are higher, the expectations of uh, withstanding seismic, wind, load, minor impact, overstrength factors are increasing. It's it's important that people have time to get out if something were to happen. So if there is nothing on file, we start from scratch. And what I generally see is um, client will move into a facility, they'll walk through, it's an existing operation, they put in 2,500 pound pallets. That great, that's what we have. Um, Fast forward, deal's done, they're in that there. They need to get the rack certified to get the business license or whatever. They need to get up and running. They call someone like us, we run through it, and now they're looking at 1,800 pounds max.
Hmm.
That's a very real scenario. Just because what could carry 30,000 pounds in the last code will not pass the math to carry 30,000 pounds of pallets in this code. Um, and the other thing that we're seeing with the increase in severity of the code is a lot higher stresses on the slab, higher uplift levels, and you want to ruin a slab engineer's day. You talk to them about pallet racking because they're dealing with uniform loads and distributed loads and that type of thing. And we're coming at them with pallet racking with a load that mimics almost building column values. But you see a building column with a top of slab mount, you're going to have a 3/4 inch, 1 inch thick base plate that's 12 by 12 by 12. And us rack guys are coming in saying, I've got 25,000 pounds, 12 and a half per base plate, and it's 3.5 by 5 inches. And they just their eyes roll up in their head. So slab analysis is a big part of it too, right? I mean, back in the day, we just say, well, beam can carry this, frame can carry that. That's your allowable load. Really, that's not acceptable. You've got to say beam can carry this, frame can carry this. The lower of those two is where we start. Now, can the floor carry that, right? And by extension, can your sprinklers accept that kind of loading pattern? That's a far more current and acceptable and defensible analysis of a pallet racking proposed install, existing or otherwise. So that's what we do. We check all those things, and what's likely going to happen is you're going to get some value um, that may or may not be what the previous owner was using, and you've got to decide at that point as an owner operator, does that work or does it not? But I would never go into an existing facility um, that has no racking, sealed racking documentation, with the expectation that I'm going to be able to load the rack as heavily as it's currently being loaded. Once evaluated under the current code, just because they
Uh,
keep moving the
um,
bar.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that does speak to the value of having those sealed drawings, because if they're grandfathered against any changes, then you're insulating yourself from having to always conform to the next layer of code, which always does seem to
Yeah,
get more intensive.
there's still a lot of there's a lot of again, this is new. This is new for a lot of people that this engineering is required. Um, I'm ever I'm ever the optimist. If people are not insisting that there's an engineering aspect to you buying pallet racking components, then I'm assuming that they're just old school and um, you know been doing it the same way for 10 years, 15 years, and they just don't know any better. But every new sales rep that we put out there, every new engineer that we put out there, every dealer that we work with training, um, we're instilling this core duty of care of safety. You've got to do this, and it's. I mean, you're talking. I mean, to get your rack fully engineered. I mean, let's just throw a number of like it's kind of a flat rate. It's between 3,500 and 6 grand, depending on really who you're dealing with. But let's just put a number on somewhere like that. I've got clients with 300, 400 five, $800,000 jobs. If I want to spend $1,000 to check the slab, I mean, it's such a small percentage when you look at the total costs of involved of a startup. So I encourage people to get it. If you need a permit, um, get a permit, even if it's not incumbent on you getting a license. And what I recommend to clients and municipalities that don't require a permit, I suggest you pretend you do. And so even if I give you all the documentation and you put it in a file cabinet, um, there's a very high likelihood that the requirement for a permit will come to your region soon because it's slowly spreading across all areas of the country. And, better to have it and in a drawer, and then, you know, heaven forbid something were to happen, you have a leg to stand on when when people come calling to ask if you as an owner operator did your due diligence prior to, you know, event XYZ. So yeah, always push engineering. Oh, and if it's not offered, ask
Yeah, that's great
why is
advice.
it not part of this package?
Can we circle back to the one scenario that you mentioned about not having sprinklers in the building? Because
Sure.
this it's not common necessarily, but it does happen. And we do come across buildings that are not sprinklered, especially older ones. And
Mhm.
if there's adequate ceiling height, a lot of companies might just assume that they can rack it right to the ceiling. And maybe it's an older building, but it still has 28-foot ceilings and isn't
Hmm.
sprinklered. But to
Hmm.
your point, you're going to have a restriction on how high you can actually rack that. And I've had
100%.
scenarios like this actually happen. So this is a real issue that people need to be aware of for buildings that don't have sprinklers.
Yep. And it's certainly older buildings. I've worked with contractors within the last year that are building buildings um, without sprinklers in. They're making that conscious choice, and there's certain applications, certain locations where there's justification for that path. But absolutely, that it does limit how high you can stack your goods, um, and it does matter what you're storing. I mean, if it's encapsulated plastics, um, rubber, that type of thing. Again, I'm not a fire expert, but I did work through this very scenario this year, and it was great. I mean, customers very happy with the solution we provided. It just doesn't allow you to take full advantage of the height, but if you're building a very tall building with those sprinklers, it's probably not for pallet storage. There's probably something else going on in that facility because any warehouse that's being built that specifically with the intent of storing pallets is getting a sprinkler in these days. But there's certainly applications that require pallet racking that that those sprinklers may not currently exist. So, but
It's
I can't remember the actual number, but it's reduced and it depends on the classification. So seek out professional advice before you make financial or legal commitments.
a scenario where this can arise, whether it's an investor or a broker, though, is that building that was built for a non-warehouse use. So maybe someone elected
Mhm.
to build 28-foot ceilings, didn't need sprinklers, wasn't required to have sprinklers, went through the life cycle of their business in that building and then left. And then the next tenant goes in, they see 28-foot ceilings, they see a warehouse that would be very conducive for racking, but there isn't sprinklers. And this is a blind spot that many brokers and investors can have, is that they don't even think about it. It's just they assume that because there's 28-foot ceilings or whatever arbitrary number we pick, that it will be compatible for racking. But if it doesn't have sprinklers, I've heard quotes anywhere from $3 to $5 a square foot to install a sprinkler system, and maybe it's more, maybe it's less, depending on what area someone's in. But if you're looking at a 100,000 square foot building, that's a $300 to $500,000 cost just to bring sprinklers in, which that is a serious amount of money to contemplate when you're already negotiating a deal. If you come across that after the deal is already done and they go to get their permit and they go to install racking and they find out that it's not sprinklered, It's just another example, I suppose, of a blind spot that someone could have, that if they just assume that because the building had this and they didn't go through the exercise of saying, will this building actually work for racking? I think that that's the big takeaway that I have from this, is that
Yeah.
racking has gone from being that Wild West to now there are significant requirements at the municipal level, varying, like you said, it's municipal dependent, but the code is evolving, requirements are evolving, the duty of care is evolving. That also means that we need to be that much more aware of these buildings that we go into, especially if there isn't a
Hmm.
sprinkler system in there.
100%. You touched on a lot of really interesting points there. Another another thing to consider is if you're looking at an existing facility, um, make a mental note of the age of the building in the area and the age of the buildings in the area, because I've come across on a number of occasions where the building has a sprinkler and it was maybe in the first phase of a new industrial development area. And in the 90s, right, or early 2000s. 2.5, 3 decades later of ongoing industrial expansion in that area. Now maybe they're not on the edge of town. Now they're in the middle of this industrial area. And I've had clients with buildings with sprinklers that they no longer actually have the flow rate
Hmm.
to substantiate racking to the height to utilize the entire building. And they're having to put in I don't know the term, but like essentially kicker pumps or additional pumping capacity to provide pressure and flow to service racking stored at this height under current code. So just because you walk in somewhere and there's sprinklers up there, you got to have a little bit of situation awareness, because say a number of times, it's like, oh yeah, we've been we, when we built this building, we were all by ourselves in the field, and now you're a 30-minute drive into the core of an industrial unit. Well, everybody's pulling from the same water, right? So, in scenarios where those water mains and that water supply has not kept up with the demand, I've had existing systems fail, and part of them actually getting the permit is putting in a little pump station.
Wow. I had never even
Wow,
considered that. That
wouldn't that
is,
be great to find out
oh,
after the fact? So due diligence I mean, if you're in the business of racking and pallet storage, or if you are in the business of of holding assets that you rent, or you that are reasonably high turnover for these storage places. I mean, as somebody that's trying to rent out a space, or as a user that wants to evaluate a space for potential racking, I'm going to expect that that person marketing that space has slab construction details, so I can check to see if my racking will work. Up-to-date sprinkler drawings and some performance specs, so we can evaluate if that space is suitable for the classification of what we want to store. Um, and a good PDF. I mean, CAD's great, but like a good PDF of that facility layout, so we can determine, including exits, egress, that type of thing. I mean, and if you're in a seismic area, so anywhere Rocky Mountains and west, whether it's California up to Washington State, or BC, um, or if you're in Montreal, Ottawa Valley. I mean, there's a if you're in a seismic hotspot and you're marketing a place for pallet racking, you should have a geotechnical report, or some sort of document that will provide the information required to do a seismic analysis. Um, they don't cost a ton of money. In the U.S., there's a phenomenal online service, which I could provide you a link with too, where you can look up by geographical location and get seismic parameters. Canada has a similar one through the NRC. You just type in an address or a Latin longitude, and it gives you all the stuff. And that's part of our pre-eng is we'll go through and We'll use this data online and just do some quick checks just to see if seismically that slab's going to be suitable. So, but if you're marketing places, having this stuff in like available to potential clients puts you like here,
Hmm.
especially if I'm moving in, because let's face it, I'm trying to relocate my business. My mind is moving around. The last thing I want to do is get blindsided by the fact that your building has a 4-inch slab, right? Or you've got a hollow core slab, or something like that. That's really going to lack the ability to put racking in there. So if you, as part of that package where you're marketing, um, having a geotech, um, digging up the structure, the construction drawings, so the slab thickness, all that sort of stuff. Having a site class, um, or other geotechnical information for the build for that location, is huge. Is huge because it allows it's full transparency and allows people to, commit earlier. Right. That's what we're looking for. We want people to we want to get this available inventory of industrial space, locked up. And the easier you make people to commit to do that by providing all this information ahead of time, the more successful you're going to be, and the less empty inventory you're going to have on your books. Right? So,
Those are some great tips. This certainly dispels the notion that a warehouse is just four walls and a roof. Like it's you start realizing there's a lot more complexity that unfortunately few people appreciate. So this has been awesome. Like I really value the insights that you gave us on this. If anybody has any questions for Jonathan, we'll certainly take a minute or two to answer those. But also wanted to preview that I had a chance to go through Jonathan's facility, 52,000 square feet on a couple of acres where they manufacture this racking, and we made a video on it. We actually had to go back a second time because the first time the audio didn't work. So myself and my two-man crew were fortunate to get through with Jonathan, and we're working on showing the whole procedure of the material coming in and then getting fabricated and powder coated and the entire process of making this racking. And it is absolutely fascinating. So hoping to have that in the out in the next week or so. And yeah, really wanted to thank you, Jonathan, for taking the time to let me get through and do the factory tour, and then also just shining a light on a topic that most people probably don't give a lot of thought to, but really should. So really do want to thank you for your time on that.
thank you, Chad. I appreciate it. As I say, you've got great questions. I love sharing what I know, and if new things come to light in the industry, you've been a great sounding board to bounce that stuff off of. So I really appreciate the opportunity to sit with you this afternoon.
Yeah, likewise. And I'll put links to North American Storage and your LinkedIn in the show notes. And if you send me those seismic websites for Canada and the US, I'll also include those. But yeah, I'd encourage anybody that needs storage options or wants to talk about racking or has a use for it to reach out to Jonathan, because you can see that he's not only a an expert in it, but also passionate about it as well. So look forward to putting that out. And Jonathan, look forward to keeping in touch. And I'm sure we'll have more to talk about too down the road.
Look forward to it, Chad. We're keeping manufacturing alive here. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer. So appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Jonathan. And thanks, everybody. And hope everyone enjoys their weekend.
Industrial real estate, oh, how you shine. With your loading docks and your parking lots wide. From factories to distribution, you're the backbone of our land. Here's to the warehouses in the heart of this great land.